I found out about the affair the same day my wife decided to make it public. Not in private, not through tears or guilt, but in front of 40 people at our annual family reunion. The smell of barbecue smoke still hung in the air when she stood up, glass in hand, smiling like she was announcing a pregnancy instead of a betrayal. My name's Mark Ellison, 41 years old. I run a construction company in Omaha, Nebraska. And until that Saturday afternoon, I thought my life was stable, not perfect, but solid. A wife, a mortgage, a small business, a future. I built everything with my hands, piece by piece. Turns out, I was building on sand. She waited until everyone quieted down, then she dropped the bomb. "Mark," she said, "I need to be honest with you. I've been seeing someone for months. And it's Ethan. Ethan, my cousin, my closest blood relative. The guy who used to borrow my truck every other weekend, who spent Christmases at our table, who toasted my wedding 15 years ago. He didn't deny it. He just stood there beside her, hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes like a guilty kid." The crowd fell silent. My uncle coughed. My mother looked away. Sarah smiled, that cruel, relieved smile of someone who's been waiting to unload a secret too long. Then she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm leaving you for him." I didn't shout, didn't throw the table or curse or ask why. I just looked at her, nodded once, and said something that turned her world upside down. "That's fine, Sarah. Just make sure Ethan knows what he's inheriting." She frowned, confused, but I didn't elaborate. I just turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in front of everyone, unsure if I meant money, debt, or something worse. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd seen this coming months ago. The late nights at the gym, the sudden interest in Ethan's business advice, the whispering at family dinners. I'd stayed silent, watched patterns form, and planned accordingly. Because I'm not the kind of man who reacts in anger. I'm the kind who prepares in silence. And Sarah was about to learn that when I build something, whether it's a house, a company, or revenge, I build it to last. When I left the reunion, I didn't drive home. I drove to the construction site instead, the one I'd been managing for 6 months, a lakefront property I'd planned to retire on someday. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching the sunset through the half-finished frame of what was supposed to be our dream house. It was quiet out there. No voices, no family, no fake apologies. Just wind and the smell of pine. That's when the silence settled in. The kind that doesn't mean peace, but control. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. What I felt was colder, heavier, something that demanded patience. I've spent my whole life building things. Homes, trust, order. Now I was going to dismantle one. Brick by brick. Sarah thought I'd be humiliated. That I'd rage and beg and make a scene. That's why she did it publicly. She wanted witnesses. Proof that she was the one leaving me, not the other way around. But that's the thing about playing with pride. It's only a weapon if the other person values it. I didn't. I started reviewing everything in my head. The house, the accounts, the company. She didn't realize that nearly everything we had was under my name. When we married, I'd built my business from scratch, using my own credit and savings. I'd added her name later, partly out of love, partly out of habit. But a few months ago, when things between us started to shift, I'd quietly reversed that. Updated documents. Adjusted ownership. Moved funds. On paper, she was already a guest in a life she thought she owned. Ethan was a small-time realtor, always chasing quick flips and easy cash. The kind of guy who thought charm was a skill and debt was just a temporary inconvenience. Sarah didn't know about the lawsuits he'd buried, or the gambling debts he'd tried to hide from the family. I did, because while they were sneaking around, I'd been watching. When I finally went home that night, the house was half empty. Her clothes were gone. The photo frames had been turned face down on the mantel, like someone covering a body. There was a note on the counter, written in her perfect, detached handwriting. "I hope someday you understand. I need to be happy." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and slid it into a drawer. She thought this was freedom. What she didn't realize, freedom comes with a cost. And I was about to send her the bill. The first few days after she left were silent, almost peaceful. People at work assumed I was taking it hard, but I wasn't. I kept my head down, stayed late at the office, let everyone think I was grieving. In truth, I was planning. The kind of planning that doesn't make noise but changes everything once it starts. I began with the company. Ellison Construction was small but solid. 10 employees, steady contracts, no debt. I'd built it without her, but I'd let her handle the office accounts for years. I checked every transaction from the last 6 months and saw what I expected. Small, irregular withdrawals. Cash advances on the business card. Transfers to her personal account labeled as supplies. She was paying for Ethan's life with my company's money. I didn't confront her. I documented everything. Every receipt, every transaction, every date. I made copies and filed them neatly in a folder marked proof. Then I made an appointment with my lawyer, a man named Collins who'd helped me with permits and property disputes in the past. When he asked what was going on, I told him simply that I needed to protect my assets in case of future claims. I didn't mention Sarah. Not yet. Next, I checked the property records. The lake house, the one she thought was ours, was in my company's name. It wasn't marital property. It was an investment. She had no legal claim. I also found that Ethan's real estate license was on probation. He'd been fined twice for misrepresentation. That gave me an idea. While Sarah was busy playing house with him, I met with one of our mutual friends, an accountant named Greg who owed me a favor. I asked him to run a quiet background check on both of them. Nothing official, just enough to see what they were hiding. 3 days later, Greg sent me a message. Ethan was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. 2 collection notices. A car loan in default. And Sarah had co-signed a personal loan with him 2 weeks before the reunion. That was the first real smile I'd had in days. She thought she'd traded up, that she'd found someone exciting, spontaneous. But she hadn't left me for love. She'd left me for a sinking ship. I didn't need revenge yet. I just needed time. Because when people like Sarah think they've won, that's when they start to make mistakes. 2 weeks after the reunion, Sarah called me for the first time. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped, then played the voicemail. Her voice was calm, almost polite. She said she wanted to discuss some financial matters. Translation: Ethan's debts were catching up. I saved the message and went back to work. Every morning I woke up at 5:30, brewed coffee, and followed the same quiet routine. The world assumed I was healing. My employees thought I was focused on business expansion. What I was really doing was laying groundwork. When you build a house, you start with the foundation. Same with revenge. I started transferring non-essential funds from our joint account into the business reserve. Legally, it was company money. Ethically, it was mine anyway. I was just retrieving what she'd spent. I left just enough in the joint account to make her feel comfortable, to let her believe I hadn't noticed the missing cash. Greg, the accountant, continued feeding me updates. Ethan's credit had collapsed completely. The personal loan he'd taken with Sarah was already flagged for late payment. Her name was now attached to his financial wreckage. Every new day tightened the rope she didn't realize was around her neck. Then one night, around 10 p.m., I got another call. This time I answered. She said she wanted to meet, to clear the air. I told her I was busy and hung up. The next day, I filed a motion through Collins to dissolve our joint business interests, citing operational irregularities. It sounded harmless on paper, but it effectively froze her access to anything tied to Ellison Construction. I knew what would happen next. People like Sarah don't go quietly. They get desperate. They push. They show their hand. Sure enough, a few days later, I got an email from her lawyer, demanding full access to financial records, business profits, and property details. It was the move I'd been waiting for. Because every dollar she thought she could take was already in motion, redirected, protected, or documented as misused. The proof folder Collins kept in his office would speak for itself. Sarah believed she was starting a new life. Ethan believed he'd found his golden ticket. They were both about to discover they'd been living inside a blueprint I'd drawn myself, one mistake at a time. The first crack in Sarah's confidence showed up as a text message late one Thursday night. Short, almost pleading. She said she didn't understand why the bank had frozen our joint account. I didn't respond. The next day, I received an email from her attorney, this time more formal, a request for immediate clarification. Collins replied on my behalf, citing compliance concerns and pending audit reviews. In legal language, that meant, we're holding the cards now. While Sarah scrambled, Ethan's problems were multiplying. Greg found out that Ethan had tried to refinance one of his properties using false income statements. The bank caught it, and the deal collapsed. His reputation in local real estate was starting to rot. Sarah didn't see it yet. She thought she'd hit a rough patch. But from my side, I could already see the structure bending under its own weight. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. I was waiting. Every day I went to work, signed checks, managed crews, and acted like nothing had changed. Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, I was counting down. A week later, Sarah showed up at my office unannounced. It was the first time I'd seen her since the reunion. She looked smaller somehow, like the energy she'd used to fuel her defiance was gone. She said Ethan was having financial trouble and that she was worried about how things were left between us. I let her talk. Then I told her that everything she'd withdrawn from the company was being reviewed for potential misappropriation. I said it like a simple statement of fact, nothing more. Her face went pale. She asked if I was accusing her of theft. I told her the records would speak for themselves. That was all. She left without saying another word. That night, I opened my laptop and reviewed the final set of transfers I'd made. Every asset, every account, every document was secure. She couldn't touch a cent. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that the financial web she'd tangled herself in with Ethan was closing fast. Their debts were linked now. Legally, practically, emotionally. Sarah had traded stability for excitement, security for chaos, loyalty for illusion. And the best part was, she still didn't understand that the trap she was in wasn't built by Ethan. It was built by me, one quiet, deliberate move at a time. 2 days after her visit, I got a call from Greg. His voice carried that quiet tension that comes when someone's about to tell you something big. He said Ethan's debt had caught the attention of the IRS. There were discrepancies between his reported income and property filings. It wasn't an official investigation yet, but it was close. I thanked him and told him to keep watching. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. It was early autumn, cool air, stillness everywhere. For the first time in weeks, I let myself think about Sarah, not the woman she'd become, but the one I'd met years ago. The one who used to bring me lunch at job sites, laugh at my rough hands, dream with me about owning land by the water. Somewhere along the way, she'd traded quiet contentment for noise and novelty, and I'd stopped trying to compete with it. The next morning, I received another voicemail from her. Her voice was sharp now, controlled panic beneath the surface. She said she knew what I was doing and that I'd regret making this harder than it had to be. I replayed it twice, then forwarded it to Collins. His only response was a short line. Keep that. Might be useful later. A week passed. Then the news came out in the local business section. Ethan Cole, real estate broker, under investigation for tax discrepancies and fraudulent filings. His photo was there, confident smirk gone, replaced by exhaustion. The story spread fast in our small town. Clients pulled out. Deals froze. And through all of it, Sarah stayed quiet. Until she didn't. She showed up at the construction site again, this time demanding to talk. She said Ethan was in trouble, that everything was being taken out of context, that she needed access to our joint savings to help stabilize things. I listened, hands in my pockets, calm as stone. Then I said something simple, that the accounts had been closed, and any further requests would have to go through legal channels. Her composure cracked. She said I was being cruel, vindictive, that I was ruining her life out of spite. I didn't argue. I just told her that choices have echoes. Then I walked away. She didn't realize it yet, but the echo she was hearing wasn't anger. It was the sound of her own world beginning to collapse. A month passed before I heard her voice again. By then, Ethan's name had become poison in local real estate circles. He'd lost his license pending investigation, his car had been repossessed, and he'd quietly moved out of the condo they'd been renting together. Sarah was alone now, financially drained, socially humiliated, emotionally cornered. But still, she wasn't done fighting. She called one afternoon while I was reviewing project bids. Her tone had shifted again, not desperate, not angry, but soft, almost nostalgic. She said she wanted to make things right, that maybe we could talk about a fair settlement. I told her she should speak to my lawyer. She said lawyers were cold, that we used to understand each other better than this. I didn't respond. Silence does more damage than any argument ever could. That evening, Collins sent me an update. Her lawyer had submitted a proposal for division of assets, claiming emotional distress, shared business contributions, and partial ownership of Ellison Construction. Collins had already filed a countermotion, with the proof folder attached. Every misused transaction, every transfer, every withdrawal marked with her initials. He said her case wouldn't survive discovery. The next morning, Sarah appeared at my doorstep. No warning, no appointment. She looked nothing like the woman who'd announced her affair with a smile in front of the family. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this, that I was destroying both of us. I stood there, listening, calm as ever. When she finally asked what I wanted, I told her the truth. I didn't want anything. I already had everything I needed. That's when she realized it. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, methodical, the kind that stripped away everything she thought she could control. Before she left, she said Ethan had disappeared. No calls, no explanation. She said he drained what little savings they had and vanished. I didn't react. But inside, I knew that part of her collapse wasn't his doing. It was mine. Because while she'd been busy chasing excitement, I'd made sure every door she tried to open would lead her right back to the silence she'd created. And that silence was the only thing she had left. 2 months later, the divorce hearing finally came. I arrived early, suit pressed, documents in hand. Sarah walked in 5 minutes before the session, pale but composed. Her lawyer whispered to her the moment she sat down, sliding papers across the table. She glanced at me, but I didn't return the look. I kept my focus on the folder in front of me, the quiet culmination of every move I'd made since the day she'd stood up at that reunion. When the judge called the case, Collins handled everything. Calm, factual, surgical. He presented bank statements, business ledgers, timestamps, and transaction logs, each one tying Sarah to unauthorized withdrawals. Her lawyer tried to argue emotional strain, tried to frame it as an oversight, but the evidence was too clean. Every page was dated, cross-referenced, irrefutable. At one point, the judge asked me if I had anything to add. I said no. The documents spoke for themselves. My silence was louder than any statement I could have made. By the end of the session, the ruling was clear. I kept the business, the property, and the house. She was granted minimal support, based on her new financial liabilities with Ethan. The look on her face when the decision was read, that was the moment it hit her. She hadn't just lost me. She'd lost the foundation she'd built her betrayal on. After the hearing, she waited for me outside the courthouse. The autumn wind carried dust and the faint scent of rain. She said she didn't understand how I could be so calm, so cold. She said I'd changed. I told her I hadn't. I'd just stopped speaking to people who confused kindness with weakness. She didn't follow me to the parking lot. She didn't call after that. Weeks passed. Ethan's case went public. Fraud, falsified documents, tax evasion, the works. He'd taken off to another state, but it didn't matter. His name was done. His career was finished. And every reporter who covered it made sure to mention the people he'd taken down with him, including Sarah. I never sent her the articles. I didn't need to. People like her always find their own reflection eventually. And when they do, it's never the version they thought they'd see. When the dust settled, I expected relief. But what I felt instead was something quieter, heavier, like standing in the aftermath of a storm you knew was coming. The house was mine, the business was stronger than ever, and Sarah was out of my life. On paper, I'd won. But in reality, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, clean, necessary, and final. People in town started treating me differently. Some avoided the topic altogether, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Others congratulated me for coming out on top. I just nodded and changed the subject. They didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring balance. Collins called one afternoon with an update. Sarah had filed for bankruptcy. Ethan had officially been indicted. There'd be hearings, restitution, maybe even jail time. Collins asked if I wanted to pursue civil damages against either of them. I said no. I'd already taken everything that mattered. Their comfort, their security, their illusion of control. Money wouldn't change anything now. That evening, I drove out to the lake house for the first time in months. The structure stood finished, strong, clean lines against the setting sun. I walked through the empty rooms, listening to the echo of my footsteps. It was supposed to be our dream home. Now it was just mine. And for the first time, that didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Standing on the back porch, I thought about the man I'd been when this all started. The one who would have begged for answers, demanded explanations. That version of me died the moment Sarah smiled and announced her affair like it was good news. What replaced him was quieter, sharper, unbreakable. Before leaving, I locked the door, slipped the keys into my pocket, and looked out over the still water. It reflected everything. The house, the sky, the calm I'd fought for. I realized then that sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's peace earned the hard way. Sarah had chased a version of happiness that never existed. Ethan had gambled on lies. And me? I'd rebuilt. Not just my life, but the kind of man who could stand in the ruins and not feel broken. That was the real victory. The kind you don't announce. The kind that speaks for itself. A year passed before I saw her again. It wasn't planned. I was at the grocery store on a quiet Sunday morning, just picking up supplies for the week. She was standing in the next aisle, thinner, older somehow, holding a basket with just a few items. For a second, she didn't notice me. Then she looked up, and our eyes met. There was no anger in her expression, no defiance. Just a kind of tired acceptance, like someone who'd finally stopped running. She said my name softly, almost like a question. I nodded once and said hers in return. For a moment, we stood there between rows of cereal boxes and canned goods. Two people who used to share everything and now had nothing left to say. She said she'd heard about Ethan's sentencing. 2 years in federal prison, plus restitution. She said she was working again, part-time, trying to get her life back. I wished her well. She hesitated, then said she hoped I'd found peace. I told her I had. She smiled faintly, nodded, and walked away. That night, I sat on the porch of the lake house, a beer in hand, the sound of crickets echoing through the trees. The world felt still again. Simple. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the planning, the silence. Every step had led me here, to this quiet. And I realized something I hadn't before. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. When someone betrays you, they expect chaos. They expect rage, confrontation, collapse. But the real power lies in restraint, in the calm you choose when they expect fire. That's what breaks them. That's what rebuilds you. I finished my drink, looked out at the dark water, and let the past settle like dust on an old road. Somewhere out there, Sarah was learning to live with her choices. Ethan was paying for his. And me, I was finally free from both of them. They say silence can be deafening. But in my experience, it's the opposite. Silence is clarity. It's power. It's the sound of a man who's lost everything that didn't matter and kept everything that did. And in that silence, I found peace, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness and doesn't need to explain itself. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.